Hi, welcome to your online module for EDTE 1000. Today we're going to be starting Chapter 2, trying to understand who your future students will be in the classroom. We have a few objectives, and they include understanding how race and ethnicity of your students needs to be respected and valued in the classroom. Also understanding who your English language learners are and what different programs are available for them for instruction, and also making sure that you understand how to provide equitable instruction to all of your students, regardless of ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, or gender. We're going to start for part 1 by focusing on racial and ethnic diversity in schools. Let's start with some definitions so we're all on the same ground when it comes to using this terminology. We'll start with ethnicity. Ethnicity is simply the country or countries of your ancestors. Where do you come from? This is actually also pretty big business right now, whether you're looking at Ancestry.com or 23andMe. People all over the globe are trying to trace back their ancestral roots to determine their ethnicities. But what about race? I thought I'd pose a question to you. What's the difference between race and ethnicity? Is it the same? Is it different? If it's different, how is it different? Well, let's go back in history a bit. We're going to go back to the late 1700s, where this idea of race came from. It started with a German anthropologist who was studying humans, and he felt that you could look at human beings of different ethnicities and consider them different races of people. And he studied skin color and head shape and all kinds of things. And he is actually attributed with coining the term race. And this thinking led to some European thought, especially within the realm of eugenics, which was a pseudo-scientific school of thought that was some of the origins for the Holocaust. This idea that some races are superior to others, and that if some are superior than others, then perhaps slavery is okay, perhaps concentration camps are okay. So, where has that led us? Today, we know that this idea of races is wrong. In fact, if you look at the DNA of human beings, we are 99.9% alike, indicating clearly there are not different races of human beings. However, we do still use this term today. Today, the way race is considered is that it is a socio-historical concept based on society's perceptions of differences among people based upon the color of your skin or other physical appearances, and that somehow these differences are important. So again, we do still use these terms, but I think it's important to know the historical background for the term race. All right, so race and ethnicity in schools. I wanted to provide you with a lot of data in this particular chapter so that you can understand how this affects the U.S. at large as well as Ohio. So let's start with below here we have public schools in the United States, race and ethnicity. There are a couple things you can note here. If you can see my cursor, you'll notice the gray columns are white students, and you can see that, yes, they are the predominant majority of your student population, but you can also see that they are decreasing over time. You can see Hispanic students here in this gold color. In the orange color are your African American students, and you can see that although they are the minority, they are slowly increasing over time. I think it's always good to look at data to see what's happening in schools. So how is the population changing? Although the U.S. population is predominantly white, it is slowly decreasing over time. It is estimated that by 2020, it will go from about 60% to about 40-some% of the population being white. The school population reflects the increasing diversity of the U.S. even more profoundly because it's the younger population. So what's happening is we're having younger immigrants come into the United States and have children. So yes, our population is getting more diverse, but the school population is even more diverse than the population as a whole. So you can see below, I've provided some statistics on the students of color in public school system. I thought it would also be important to point out that race and ethnicity varies across the U.S. depending on where you live. So if you are in the western part of the U.S., that is where you have the greatest concentration of students of color, especially Latino and Hispanic students. The Midwest is the least diverse. I do want to point out Ohio is considered in the Midwest, but Ohio is kind of a different state. It's somewhat rural, somewhat urban. There's actually a hub of immigration in Columbus. Let's look at Ohio as a state. So here you can see the race or ethnicity of the public school students in Ohio. You can see it's 69% white, which obviously means it's about 31% minority students. What else can we see in our data? This is also for Ohio, just the state of Ohio. You can see an increase in minority students over time. And I mentioned this briefly, but you may or may not know this. Columbus, Ohio is a hub for immigration. They have a large number of immigrants from the Somali area. They have, in fact, entire charter schools that are built for these students, as well as the public school system. But immigration is a big part of Ohio, especially in Columbus. Adding to this, the South has the largest concentration of African American students. The West, I already mentioned, Latino and Asian American, and students of color make up the majority of students in your urban areas, and because that's where most of your immigration centers are as well. So when I'm talking about schools being rural or urban, is a state ever completely rural or urban? Not really. You can look here at this map of Ohio, and you can see urban areas are the gold and the dark blue. Sorry, the gold and the lighter blue. And then you can also see, so right here we have an urban area, right here we have one here, obviously for Cleveland. There are little pockets of large urban areas, and then you can see the rest of it is primarily rural. Rural is this teal and this lightish green. Look how much rural we have. So we have a little bit of everything in Ohio. I wanted to compare one last set of data for Ohio to get you to better understand the state that you're at least going to school in. You can see on the left I have urban schools, on the right I have rural schools. So urban, 35% white for the students. Rural, 94.8% white. So there's a big difference in Ohio between our urban and our rural areas. Well, what about diversity of teachers? I thought I'd pose a question to you. What percent of public school teachers in the U.S. are white? I'll give you a moment to think about it. If you guessed 80%, you are correct. Now, wait a minute. Let's backtrack. Let's say now you're in an urban school where 65% of your students are minorities, but maybe up to 80% of your teachers are white. There's a discrepancy there. So let's move forward. So the diversity of teachers does not really match the diversity of the student population. To make that a bit more clear, about 4 out of 5 of public school teachers are white. 3 out of 5 are women. If you'd like to see that data in a bit more detail, this is not just Ohio, this is the entire United States. You can see the breakdown, and again, blue indicates the white teachers or students, and then the rest of the colors you can see are indicated in the legend below. So you can see that stark difference there. So Ohio's teachers, who are they? Well, they are actually 92.5% white. So it is even more of a ethnicity gap in Ohio than looking at the U.S. in general. And then the students are 69% white across the entire state. Here's a short video I wanted to show you talking about the importance of having teachers of color in the classroom.
Teachers of color are underrepresented in the U.S. workforce and leave the profession at a higher rate than their white peers. The primary reasons cited: isolation and a lack of support. But having teachers of color yields positive outcomes for all students. They force classrooms to break down negative stereotypes, help students understand and confront racism, and prepare students to live in a multicultural society. And for many students of color, it can be life-changing. A 2018 study found that Black students who had a single Black teacher were 13% more likely to enroll in college. With 2 Black teachers, that number jumps to 32%. For Black boys, the impact is even more powerful. Having a Black teacher cut high school dropout rates by 39% for Black boys from low-income families. It's not just because they are seeing a role model who looks like them, though the research says that does matter. Compared to their white counterparts, Black teachers have higher expectations for Black students, and they're less likely to perceive Black students as disruptive, inattentive, or unable to do homework. So there's a gap in representation, and it's holding all of our students back. The demographic data reveals the scope of the problem. Nearly 80% of U.S. teachers are white, but a majority of students are children of color. We must do the hard work of addressing the diversity problem in our teaching workforce. Students need to see their own cultures reflected in the adults responsible for their learning.
I hope you found that helpful. I think that it is important to understand what's going on out there in the world today. All right, before we go any further, let's talk a little bit about teaching diverse students. And I wanted to start again with a question for you. So a lot of people talk about how, I'm blind to color. I'm colorblind. I don't see race. Is that a good approach for teachers? I think that's something worth thinking about. I think that sometimes people say that without really thinking about what that means. Should we be colorblind? So being colorblind, what that means is that you don't see the race and ethnicity of your students. And please excuse that I left that word out there. Don't see the race and ethnicity of your students. And you treat everyone the same. That sounds good, but the problem is most of our curriculums are based upon European American history. They don't integrate other colors. They're very white oriented. And you saw from the video that teachers have different expectations for students. And I like this graphic here, this idea if you hide history, it's doomed to repeat itself. So perhaps being colorblind is almost like sticking your head in the sand. It might be a well-intentioned approach, people saying, I don't see color, I just see people, but it can also be harmful. It ignores the realities of racism that are out there, and it relies on the concept that race-based differences don't matter. So you might be ignoring that there could be real bias and stereotypes occurring in your classroom that you're refusing to look at. So that idea of I don't see color, I only see people could perhaps be harmful. And you do need to embrace the differences of your students and bring them into the classroom as a value rather than just ignoring them and glossing them over and not seeing them. Okay, let's continue. When it comes to teaching diverse students, there's some important things you need to know about the disparities that can occur among your groups of students. We call this the achievement gap. The achievement gap is the difference in academic attainment occurring between your white students and your minority students. Please look at the data below. So here, this is for Ohio. I like, when possible, to show you what's happening in your state. This first chart is for fourth graders, and you can see the gap between the white students, which are the green columns, the Hispanic students, and the African American students. The second chart over here is for your 8th grade students, and here you can also see a very similar gap between how white students are scoring and the minorities in your classroom. So what is the achievement gap? The difference in academic performance and achievement among groups of students in your classroom. It is real, it is important. Basically what the data tends to show us is white and Asian American students score at higher levels. They're more likely to graduate high school. There is, however, another way of looking at this achievement gap, that perhaps is more likely an opportunity gap. that perhaps white and Asian American students have more opportunities to learn. This would then go back to socioeconomic status, which we'll be covering in part 2. So the idea that if you have more resources, if you're going to higher income schools, then maybe you're going to do better than students who come from a lower income family and go to lower income schools. So the opportunity gap is also very real. It begins early in life. As I mentioned previously, it is connected to poverty or socioeconomic status, and it's due to a family's ability to provide those resources for their students, which also includes things like nutrition and healthcare, as well as what educational opportunities they have. Those things matter when it comes to academic attainment. Here's some data I found to show you on the opportunity gap. Now, there's a lot of data here to look at. We could first look at the left column on poverty, and you can see that Black and Hispanic students are 3 times more likely to live in poverty than whites. Whites are in this hot pink color, Hispanics are in the gold, Black students are in the teal. When it comes to health, Hispanic children are twice as likely to have no health insurance. And over here on the last column, when it comes to education, white children twice as likely to graduate. All of this can feed into this opportunity gap that we're talking about. So how do we close the opportunity gap? What can we do? There are a lot of potential answers. This is not a all-inclusive list, but I'm going to hit some of them. We need to make sure that our students from low-income areas and our minority students have more and better learning resources. So when you have opportunities to donate or to assist schools in need, please do so. There are low-income schools all around, even in rural areas. And they're often doing supply drives and looking for resources or trying to make connections with community groups. Here's a short video talking about one way that a school is trying to use different and really up-to-date technology to bring in better resources for their students for more hands-on work.
The best activities in classrooms develop a lot of skills at one time, both cognitive and social emotional. As we talk a lot about the complex thinking and problem solving that people need to be able to do in today's society, in order to do that, you need the capacity to self-regulate, to manage your time and your emotions. You need the capacity of executive functioning, to organize how you approach things, to be metacognitive and reflective about your work. These things are developed in certain kinds of work simultaneously.
Creative problem solving is a skill that we want our kids to have. And the makerspace is the place in the classroom where we're cultivating that skill in our kids.
I'm supposed to make something, and it's like supposed to help people or like help fix a solution.
Alright, so what's your design?
She'll get your approval, so then you can start getting your materials and make it.
When you give kids autonomy and choice and really hands-on materials, you have them applying the learning in a way that helps them to gain deep understanding.
If you give children a project to undertake, a passion that they have, that they want to find the answer to, they need to be able to organize themselves. They will be using critical thinking and problem solving, and as they undertake these tasks, they're building both the social and emotional foundation, and they're also building the cognitive abilities to demonstrate their learning.
It's almost second nature to them that you keep working on something.
So you can see all of the incredible outcomes that go along with having enriching learning environments for students. All right, what are some other things we can do? Having personalized attention. Now, one of the ways you can do that is through smaller class sizes. Now, that can be hard to accomplish with funding issues. So perhaps you might have a teacher assistant come in and still have a large class, but at least that improves your teacher-student ratio. Get to know your students. Do as much as you can to work with them one-on-one. Having high quality teachers in urban schools. Those schools not only need to do a good job recruiting students, but also knowing that our top students thinking about where they're needed the most. Having a high quality, engaging curriculum. And also, you've heard this, I think, in a couple of the other videos, the importance of high expectations, which goes along with that curriculum. And making sure that when you're teaching, you're using culturally responsive teaching practices. I think that goes without saying. However, this next video does a nice job of explaining what that means and showing some examples. Culturally responsive teaching.
Adelante, umbral de español, busquen su nombre con su palito, muchas gracias.
There are no blank slates walking into the classroom. Culturally responsive teaching is capitalizing on all that students bring with them from their personal lives and their home lives. And it's really knowing that student, knowing where he or she is from, and using that to craft the most meaningful and rigorous learning opportunities. Here at Amigos, the bilingual school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we are focused on culturally responsive, joyful education.
To borrow Zaretta Hammond's word, culturally responsive practice really is like widening our aperture as adult educators to consider a broader perspective on what strategies can then match with our students' needs if we really want to see more equitable outcomes for our students.
One of the things that we're doing to support that work and our growth as educators are learning walks. Learning walks allow teachers to visit each other's classrooms to see how they are implementing new strategies. We are looking for evidence of equitable student participation, and we're looking to make sure that primarily there's a relationship there, because in order to teach that child, you need to know that child.
Visit the classroom, take notes using our guide.
Tienen un argumento bien fuerte, bien formado. Todos participaron. We are really looking at what instructional decisions are we making that will support students to have equity of voices, rigor, and consider their different cultures and identities, and really capitalize on that for them to feel safe and authentic and a sense of belonging into our classrooms. Tessa.
¡Ow! Ay, necesitaba evacuar. Hay bombas en todas partes. Good.
I'm really thinking about what are the different ways that one can organize the instruction so there's diversity of access points to this language in the literature, and for the students to be able to feel comfortable sharing what they know, sharing what they don't know.
Como por eso dice hito en hito, como partes de su vida que lo convierten en quien es.
I really thought that one of the strengths was your use of the vocabulary and then giving students the tools they needed to use it themselves.
Adelante.
And I think it's great how they have these learning walks with teachers helping one another, and then meeting and debriefing afterwards is quite a system, let alone the use of the culturally responsive teaching practices. And along with that, you want to try to identify any bias in the classroom, even your own. You need to look at your own thoughts, your own practices, to try to eliminate any bias and stereotyping, and teach about race and culture. Again, that's part of not being colorblind. Having open discussions, incorporating it into your literature, into your history, making it a part of your classroom. And here's one more video that I think is going to be exceptionally helpful. It talks about
I
labels.
describe myself as a very optimistic person. I'm pretty outgoing for the most part.
I would describe myself as
tall, funny.
I think I'm funny. I don't know if other people think I'm funny.
I really love poetry. It's one of my passions.
I'm a happy person. I like to be cheerful.
You know, I'm pretty laid back.
What is the meanest or worst thing anyone's ever called you?
I've been called pathetic, fat, stupid.
My family is pretty intolerant and conservative. My mom told me one time that no one decent would ever love me if I continued to call myself pansexual.
They would call me things just like whitey or cracker or stuff like that because they didn't like me. I acted more feminine, so I get the typical faggot and fruit and stuff like that.
A faggot. Over and over again. I can't stand that word.
Being called like a nigger, like I have been for like many times. The owner of the store said like, yo, you nigger, just get out my store because you're stealing. Me and my friends being gangbangers. I'm not gonna rob you when you walking down the street.
Me and my sister grew up in Shaker and in Garfield, and then we transitioned to Lee and Harvard. And a lot of kids would always say to me, you talk like a white girl. Because I talk proper, that means I talk white. It's just, it never made sense.
And how'd that make you feel?
It messes with my self-esteem. It's just really irritating that we go to school together. I have friends just like you. My grades may be better than yours, but you have a problem with the way I speak because I talk like a white girl. That doesn't make sense because I speak proper English. I talk like a white girl.
What is the best thing anyone's ever called you?
The best thing that I've ever been called is strong.
People always call me gifted.
Best thing anyone's called me was extraordinary.
I've had someone tell me that I was like one of the smartest people they know.
No one ever told me that before. I was like, wow, thanks.
It just makes me feel happy inside because they're actually seeing what I really am.
The best thing anyone has ever said to me is like called me amazing. I just love that part of knowing that someone actually thinks that I am amazing makes the whole loneliness and no one likes me thing just disappear.
My teachers called me a hero.
And it was probably the greatest compliment I've ever gotten in my life.
The greatest lesson I've ever learned is empathy. It's only through empathy that people have actually gotten to understand me and be kind to me and show me kindness. Because you can't really show kindness to somebody if you don't see the world through their eyes.
I hope you found that video as valuable as I did, and I hope you stuck around for it. This is the end of part 1 of chapter 2, but I hope it's given you some things to think about in terms of your future students. We will pick up with part 2, looking at economic diversity. Thanks for your attention.